If you're living in Japan or you're hoping to live in Japan, you basically have two main options as to where you can live. So you can live in a detached house, so this would be an ikodate in Japan, or you can live in a manshon, so a condominium. And in this video, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of each, what I think about them, and which one you should choose. Let's talk about it. So already on the channel, we have a couple of videos about the main kind of real estate questions. First one, should you rent your home or buy your home in Japan? We got a video talking about that. We've also got a video talking about whether you should buy an akiya or not. Now that we've got those two out of the way, the next one is today's video, which is where we're going to talk about the pros and cons of living in a house in Japan and the pros and cons of living in a mansion or a condominium. Before we get into the specifics, it's probably worth pointing out that real estate in Tokyo and real estate in other areas in Japan are quite different. Tokyo is, in a way, a very unique market, so you do have to take that into account if you're planning to live in Tokyo. But the content of this video should broadly apply to any place you live in Japan. In many ways, the ikodate, the detached house, is the pinnacle of Japanese living. It's what people aspire to, especially if they have a family, and it's generally seen as a slightly more desirable choice. So what are the benefits of living in a detached house in Japan? I think the biggest one is probably space and freedom. So you'll have probably more space with a house than you would with a mansion, condominium. You'll probably have a garden, it might be a small garden. You'll have somewhere to park your cars, and you'll have freedom to basically do stuff with the house. You'll be able to renovate it, change it, make slightly more noise than you would be comfortable making in a mansion. Although even detached houses in Japan tend to be quite close together, so you're not necessarily going to be able to have loud cinema nights or host raucous parties and stuff. You still do need to be conscious of your neighbors. The second big benefit is that, generally speaking, homes, unless they're in a kind of besso, kind of second home, holiday home area, or an area that's controlled by a housing company, you generally don't have to pay a monthly management fee. If you live in a home, you'll generally be more part of the neighborhood, and this can be a benefit, but it can also be a drawback for some people. So in a home, you're likely to be joining the chonaikai, the local homeowners association. You're likely to be involved with events. You might be asked to serve on the chonaikai. You might be asked to participate in various voluntary activities or management activities. There'll be regular cleaning. There might even be like regular exercise in the morning. If you've got kids, there's normally a kids version of that. And it's quite difficult to get out of it if you don't want to be involved. Often they're integrated with local schools and so on. So you, like it or not, you're likely to be more part of the local community. And of course, it's much easier to have pets if you live in your own detached house. Generally, there aren't really any rules about pets if you live in a house, unlike with a mansion. Now, there are also drawbacks. So there are some drawbacks to living in a detached house. First one is maintenance. So with a mansion, you might have to pay those monthly maintenance fees and so on. But with a house, you don't have the fees, but you do have to still do the maintenance. And the problem with this is that, unless you are particularly handy, you're not necessarily going to understand what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, how much it should cost, and so on. And also maintenance can be quite lumpy in terms of, most years you won't have anything to pay, and then suddenly, okay, I need a new roof this year. That's very expensive. So you will need to be putting money aside just to cover that eventual maintenance to the house. Much like with a car, the more careful you are, the more diligent you are in taking care of the home, the better it's going to keep its kind of quality and so on. Buying a detached house is generally involves buying the land and then buying the building as well. And this can be pretty expensive in lots of areas in Japan, particularly if you want to live somewhere convenient and desirable. You're going to be paying quite a lot more for the detached house than you might for a mansion in the same area. Another factor might be security. So Japan is pretty safe. It's one of the safest countries I've lived in, for instance. I'm not particularly worried about security, but I think detached houses are certainly more vulnerable than mansions. And we have seen lots of news stories recently about people targeting, especially elderly homeowners, because it's quite easy to target a home. So if you buy a house, you might want to think about making it slightly more intruder proof, making sure your windows have locks and so on. You don't leave the door open, you don't leave the windows open, you don't kind of advertise that you have money and stuff. And so just basic precautions that you'd take in any country. Another thing with a house is that generally, even if the land holds its value or perhaps becomes slightly more valuable if you're lucky, the building generally is going to depreciate, and it's going to depreciate on a Japanese schedule, so that after 15-20 years the house basically is not going to be worth anything. Even now, as the government is encouraging people to build kind of more robust, more durable housing, we've yet to see whether the prices are going to hold up in the long run. And finally, heating and cooling. So a mansion generally is a concrete tube, and often it's surrounded by other concrete tubes. So it's actually fairly easy to keep it warm or keep it cool. Not so with a house. So unless you make the effort to make sure that your house has really good insulation, there are companies in Japan that make houses with good insulation, but it's not the norm, and you might find yourself with a house that's pretty difficult to keep warm, pretty difficult to keep cool, and you might end up paying much higher costs in terms of that as well. Do have a video about installing windows into a home to make it more insulated and so on. I'll put a link to that in the description. So those were the pros and cons of living in a detached house in Japan. But what about a mansion? So with a mansion or condominium, you've got all sorts of choices as to the type. The consensus generally tends to be to avoid tower mansions. So tower mansions are mansions that are kind of 20, 30, 40, 50 stories high. And the reason you might want to avoid these is because the maintenance costs are much higher than they would be for shorter mansions. Mainly because if you want to do work on the outside of the building, for a tower mansion, you have to get cranes on the roof, and that is going to exponentially increase the cost of any repairs, any maintenance. So you might know I bought a mansion a few years ago. We were living in a mansion, we were renting it, and we bought it from our landlord. We now own the mansion. My wife also owns her parents' house now, so we kind of got both. And for us, living in a mansion has been really easy. I think this is the key word for mansions. It's convenience. So living in a mansion for us has been really easy. We live next to the station, literally. It's about a 30-second walk to the nearest train station. We have very good transport links where we are. There's an elevator, there's a guy on duty at the bottom every day. We have those lockers for deliveries. It's just really easy. One of the killer apps for mansions for us is that we can put the trash out whenever we want. So we have an external trash building that we have a key to access, and we can go in there and we can put the rubbish out anytime we want. And this is such a big quality of life upgrade, you wouldn't believe. And we talked about security for detached houses, but security for mansions is much easier, I think. So thinking about our mansion, so we have locked doors. You need to buzz yourself. You have to be buzzed in if you want to come into the mansion. Coming into the mansion without permission would be trespass. We do have staff on duty. To get into our mansion, there's one door. So there's a door, it's a very solid door. There's windows, there's bars on those windows. It's very difficult to physically gain access to our home, unlike with a detached house, for example. So with a mansion, you do pay a monthly maintenance fee, but in exchange for that, the management company takes care of all the external maintenance, the cleaning, the upkeep, replacing lights, keeping the elevators running, doing all that stuff, even the gardening around the place. So it's a much easier, more hands-off option. Some newer mansions have all sorts of facilities. So you might have a meeting room, you might have a gym, you might have somewhere where you can have guests, hold events, and that can be really, really nice to have. Modern mansions built after the 90s generally have very good earthquake and fire resistance. So you're much less vulnerable to, say, fires or earthquake damage. So for mansions, you've got two costs. You have a monthly maintenance cost, which directly pays for maintenance. And then you have a repair fund. You pay money into a fund, and that fund builds up until it's needed to carry out repairs or upgrades to the building, and then the money from the fund is used for those repairs. And what this means is that rather than suddenly having a big expense to, replace the roof or get the pipes cleaned or whatever, you just have a very predictable monthly fee to pay. Now, it's probably higher in a mansion, but that kind of predictability, that convenience is something that lots of people appreciate. Particularly in recent years, and especially in urban areas, mansions have been holding their value quite well. So for example, the unit that we now own has actually gone up in price. We bought it for 9 million yen. It's probably worth about 15 million yen now. So if we were to sell it, we'd actually make a profit on owning the mansion for a few years. And of course, it's been cheaper for us to live here. But there are some important drawbacks with mansions. First one is that generally you're going to have less space than you would with a house. Most of the time with a house, you've got kind of at least 2 stories, so you've got more space to spread out. A house, generally a modern house, might have 2 toilets, which is a really big factor if you're not living alone. So if you've got 2 or more people in the household, having more than 1 toilet is actually quite a nice thing to have. With a mansion, you are paying those monthly fees, and they're generally going to be higher than what you'd be paying for a house. Even if you calculate the total cost of ownership, those monthly maintenance fees and the repair fund fees are going to put quite a lot of money onto your ongoing costs for owning a mansion. Another thing is that if you own a mansion, you don't really own it. You own the unit, but you're within the larger building, and the larger building is controlled by the management company. There are often lots of rules and regulations as to what you can do and what you can't do with your mansion. So for example, for us, we wanted to put in a gas dryer. We're not allowed to. So the mansion regulations don't allow for a gas dryer to be used, etc. There's rules about what kind of renovations you can do. You need to get permission to do renovations from the units around you. You're not allowed to put certain things on the balcony. The balcony doesn't belong to you. The exterior windows don't belong to you. The door doesn't belong to you. So there are lots of compromises involved. Most mansions, for example, won't allow you to do Airbnb or similar minbaku type businesses in the building, and you might have to get permission to do other kind of commercial activities and so on. So it can be quite a lot more limiting than a house. So with a mansion, you might have less privacy in terms of, you're kind of in a smaller space with lots of people around you. You might have noise issues. Even with a well-built mansion, you still might have noise issues, and you might be conscious of how much noise you're making. You might not feel free to live exactly as you might like to, because you've got to be aware of your neighbors and so on. However, I would say in some ways there's more privacy with a mansion. It's the anonymity of the crowd, basically. In a mansion, you don't know the people living next door to you, or the people on the same floor, or the people above and below you. You're kind of passing. You might know their face, but you don't necessarily know their name. You might not have ever talked to them. Whereas if you live in a house, in a neighborhood, you generally would be more connected to the people around you. So for good or for bad, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, a mansion will often allow you to be more detached and have more kind of freedom from these social ties, and also not be, you wouldn't enjoy the social network as much as well. And one huge factor that's a real turn-off for a lot of people is parking. So many mansions don't have enough parking for all the units. And even if they do, you often have to pay a monthly fee to use it. So, you know, as long as you have a parking space with your house, you wouldn't have to pay any extra money to use that parking space. But for example, for our mansion, it costs 8,000 yen for us to rent our car parking space in the mansion car park. And we had to wait for 8 years before we got that space. There was a waiting list. There's not enough spaces for all the residents. You have to wait for someone to move out, at which point their space gets put back into the communal pool, and the next person on the waiting list is allowed to rent that space. So it can be a little bit expensive and a little bit inconvenient if you have a car. All right, so let's look at these side by side. Okay, let's look at initial costs. So the initial cost for a house can be higher, especially if you're trying to buy something in a good location. For mansions, the unit price might be lower, but high-end mansions can still be really expensive. Next is ongoing costs. So for the house, you might have property taxes and utilities, but you have to pay for all the maintenance yourself. And this isn't going to be a regular kind of thing unless you're disciplined and you put money away to deal with it. You're going to have sudden, very expensive expenses coming up. For a mansion, you're going to pay, you know, the mortgage, the rent, property taxes, utilities, and monthly management and repair fund fees. And these can be quite considerable. So make sure you find out exactly how much those are going to be costing you before you make any kind of decision. In terms of space and layout, houses generally have more space and you have more flexibility with how you can lay them out. And often you'll have some outside space, some exterior space, maybe a small garden, maybe a deck or something, and it can be a very pleasant upgrade to the living experience. Mansions are going to be more compact. Often they'll have a standardized layout that tries to have more rooms, but the rooms are much smaller. So you'll often see, you know, 3 LDK mansions where there's 3 bedrooms, but each bedroom is tiny. So you can sometimes find more modern kind of open plan, bigger layouts, but they're much rarer because mansions are generally bought by families, so they'll want 2 or 3 bedrooms in there as well. You generally get a balcony as well. In terms of customization, with a house you can generally customize it, you can renovate it, you can make changes, and you can kind of design your own space. Mansions, you're going to have lots of rules and regulations on what you can do. For maintenance, the house, you're responsible for the maintenance yourself. Whether you do it yourself or you get someone to do it for you, get a contractor in, it's your responsibility. You have to be aware that you have to do it. You have to remember to do it, and then you actually have to do it. With a mansion, the buildings management company will handle all the common areas, all the outside areas, the structure, any kind of regular maintenance, whether it's, you know, checking the fire alarms or cleaning the drain pipes and all the rest of it. It's very convenient in that way. You would have to take care of the actual interior, but there's not a huge amount to do there beyond, you know, maybe renovating it every 15, 20 years, changing the wallpaper and so on. In terms of privacy, with a house, you'll have a lot more privacy, but you might have these kind of community obligations. Whereas with a mansion, there's more people in this space. You might be more aware of your neighbors, but you don't necessarily have those same social obligations there. Security. Your house, you'd have to take care of the security yourself. It is slightly more vulnerable to intruders and so on. With a mansion, security is generally pretty good. There's limited access, there's often cameras, there's often staff, and it's much more difficult to break into. Again, because there's more people around. It's much easier to get caught. And finally, with community, you know, with a house, you'd have more traditional neighborhood interactions. You might be part of the chonaikai, you might have to participate in various events and have responsibilities. With a mansion, much less so. So generally speaking, mansions are outside of those groups and that kind of community interaction. So what do you think? Which one is a better fit for you? For us, at the moment, the mansion is definitely a clear winner because, you know, my wife's pretty busy, I'm fairly busy, I'm not particularly DIY-y. So for me, having someone else take care of all that stuff is really helpful. Being able to put the trash out anytime is life-changing, but I can see the appeal of a house. So eventually my wife and I will move into her parents' place. We renovated it a few years ago. There's a really nice garden, there's a really nice view. So I think for us, having both, we kind of got the best of both worlds. You know, we can go over, we can use the garden, we can have a barbecue, we can kind of relax. It's incredibly quiet and peaceful out there. But the mansion is much easier, it's much more convenient, it's much easier to get into town and back, it's much easier to get to the airport from the mansion. So there is a real difference. So I think in retirement we might enjoy the house more. At the moment, the mansion is a real winner. So how about you? If you have bought a home in Japan, which did you choose? Did you choose mansion or did you go with the detached house? Leave us a comment, let us know your thinking there. If you haven't bought a house yet, if you've got any questions at all, please leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching and we'll see you in the next video.